87 North Korean tanks rolled across Ukrainian soil, their engines roaring, their crews are convinced they were untouchable. To Moscow, it was meant to be a show of strength. To Pyongyang, it was proof that their armor could strike fear even thousands of miles away from home. But what neither expected was how quickly that illusion would shatter. Above them, unseen and unheard, Ukraine's newly deployed F-16 fighter jets waited. Trained pilots, armed with precision-guided weapons and backed by NATO intelligence, had been preparing for this exact moment. The battlefield wasn't chosen by accident. This stretch of terrain was a carefully crafted kill zone, and the tanks had walked straight into it. When the order was given, the silence of the skies broke in an instant. Explosions tore through the front of the column, fireballs lit up the horizon, and chaos consumed the crews below. Communications collapsed, orders turned into screams, and in less than a minute, what was once a formidable armored force was reduced to burning steel. This is Richard Wolff, and what I am about to reveal is not just a battle report. It's the story of how Ukraine's F-16s reshaped the rules of modern warfare in seconds. Before we dive into the moment itself, let's pause for a second. Why would North Korean tanks, nearly 90 of them, even be in Ukraine? That's the first question many are asking. The answer is as complex as it is shocking. With Russia's ongoing war efforts stretching into years, supply lines running thin, and losses piling up, Moscow sought reinforcements not just from its own dwindling reserves, but from sympathetic allies who were willing to provide material and manpower. Enter North Korea, a state whose aging yet numerous military equipment has long been touted as a potential resource for Russia. Though these tanks are not the most advanced by NATO standards, the sheer number, nearly 90, represents a formidable moving wall of firepower, especially when advancing through contested terrain. But numbers alone do not win wars, and as history has repeatedly shown, quantity without quality or strategy can quickly turn into a liability. This was not just another battlefield encounter. This was a collision of eras, old, lumbering armored machines designed for brute force, facing off against modern aerial precision, speed, and intelligence-guided strikes. Ukraine's F-16s, newly trained pilots at the helm, and NATO advisors guiding their deployment, represented a turning point. These aircraft were not simply tools of war, they were symbols of Ukraine stepping into a new chapter of military capability, one where the playing field with Russia and its allies began to look very different. The day of the confrontation started like many others along the front. Reports came in from reconnaissance units and satellite feeds showing an unusual movement of armored vehicles. At first, analysts suspected Russian reinforcements. But as the images became clearer, the markings on the tanks raised eyebrows. They were not Russian-built T-90s or T-72s. They bore the distinctive outline of North Korea's Chonmaho tanks, a design based on old Soviet blueprints but modified by Pyongyang. To see them here, rolling in a long, almost endless line across Ukrainian terrain, was something that left intelligence communities buzzing. This wasn't just about military aid. This was a statement by North Korea, indirectly declaring its presence in one of the most geopolitically charged conflicts in the world. For Ukraine, however, there was no time to marvel or speculate. This was a deadly column, 87 tanks strong, pushing towards positions that could overwhelm local defenses if not stopped in time. The urgency was real, and that's when the order came. Scramble the F-16s. Imagine the atmosphere in that moment. On one side, inside those tanks, North Korean crews likely felt confident. They had numbers, armor, and the psychological advantage of making their presence known. They believed they were about to punch through Ukrainian lines, carve a path, and hand Moscow a symbolic victory. On the other side, Ukrainian pilots, newly entrusted with some of the most advanced fighters on Earth, prepared for their first large-scale real-world test. Everything they had trained for, every maneuver, every split-second decision, was about to be tested under fire. When the Ukrainian F-16s roared into the skies, they carried not just missiles and bombs, but the weight of expectation. The eyes of the military command, the people of Ukraine, and even allies abroad were watching. Could these aircraft, donated and supported by Western nations, truly change the tide of battle? The answer would come swiftly and decisively. As the tanks entered what is now known as the kill zone, a stretch of terrain carefully chosen and mapped by Ukrainian intelligence, the trap was sprung. Precision-guided munitions began raining down with terrifying accuracy. The first explosions shattered the calm of the battlefield, fireballs erupting from the lead vehicles, columns of black smoke shot into the air, signaling to every tank crew behind that they were now caught in something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. What makes this moment remarkable isn't just the destruction, but the speed. Within seconds, communication among the tanks collapsed. Confusion spread like wildfire. Some tried to maneuver out of the line, only to be targeted by laser-guided bombs. Others attempted to fire upwards or retreat, but in open terrain against fighter jets with modern systems, they were sitting ducks. It was less a battle and more an execution of precision warfare. Reports from the ground describe scenes of chaos. Tank crews abandoning their vehicles, commanders screaming orders that were drowned out by the roar of jet engines, and the sheer psychological terror of realizing that no amount of armor could protect them from the sky. 87 tanks had entered this zone with confidence, but in a matter of moments, that confidence turned into shock, then panic, and finally devastation. For Ukraine, this was more than a tactical win. It was a message, a demonstration that the days of unchecked armored advances were over. The world saw not just tanks being destroyed, but an entire doctrine of warfare being shattered in seconds. For Russia, this was a humiliating blow. To rely on North Korean equipment and then watch it be obliterated so publicly was not just a battlefield loss, it was a geopolitical embarrassment. For North Korea, the implications were equally devastating. Their hardware, once boasted as reliable and fearsome, had been exposed as outdated and vulnerable when faced with modern Western technology in Ukrainian hands. The international reaction was immediate. Military analysts across Europe and the United States began dissecting the event. Was this the definitive proof that air superiority, even on a small scale, can completely neutralize ground-based strength? Was this the moment the war in Ukraine tilted decisively in favor of Kiev's defenders? And perhaps most importantly, what message did this send to other nations considering direct or indirect involvement? Richard Wolff, reporting on this moment, captured the gravity perfectly. He didn't just describe tanks being destroyed, he painted the broader picture, a war that is no longer just about land, but about technology, alliances, and psychological dominance. The sight of Ukrainian F-16s eliminating nearly 90 tanks in mere seconds became more than just battlefield news. It became a defining image of this stage of the conflict. And as we break down this event, there's another layer that deserves attention. Behind the explosions and the dramatic images lies the quiet, meticulous planning of Ukrainian intelligence. The identification of the kill zone, the timing of the strikes, and the synchronization with the F-16 pilots were not accidents. They were the result of painstaking preparation, cooperation with Western intelligence agencies, and a growing confidence that Ukraine's military could not only survive, but outthink and outmaneuver its adversaries. But the story doesn't end there. In war, every action creates ripples. The destruction of North Korean tanks in Ukraine did not simply end with smoldering wrecks. It raised urgent questions in Pyongyang. Would North Korea double down, sending more equipment to salvage its reputation? or would it quietly retreat from this dangerous involvement? It raised questions in Moscow too. Could Russia truly rely on foreign equipment to bolster its forces, or would such attempts only expose further weakness? And in Kiev, the morale boost was palpable. Soldiers on the front lines spoke of newfound confidence, of believing that with tools like the F-16, victory was not just possible, but within reach. As the world digests the images of those destroyed tanks and the triumphant return of Ukrainian F-16s to their bases, one thing is clear. This was not just a battle, this was a turning point, a lesson written in fire and steel that will echo in military academies and strategy rooms for years to come. Ukraine showed that in modern warfare, intelligence, precision, and the courage to act swiftly can obliterate even the mightiest displays of brute force. This is Richard Wolff, and this is the story of how 87 tanks entered a battlefield with confidence, and how in seconds they were reduced to nothing but smoke, fire, and the unmistakable truth that the future of war belongs to those who command the skies.